This episode series was done in partnership with and sponsored by Showtime.
Craig, now pull out into Benicio.
And action!
Escape at Dannemora is about two inmates, Richard Matt and David Sweat, who, with the help of a civilian worker, Joyce Mitchell, escaped out of Clinton Correctional in June of 2015.
Going up to Dannemora, seeing the woods, the mountains, the hills, seeing the town, then seeing the prison and the prison wall. I don't think you know what it's like till you've been in.
When you shoot in a real location where a real event happened, there's a seriousness to it.
It's scary, it's also exciting.
My goal with the show was to have it be as accurate as possible, and I felt the best way to tell the story would be to have as many of the real people who actually went through it.
Hello and welcome to Real Crime Profile. This is Jim Clemente, retired FBI profiler, former New York City prosecutor, and writer-producer on CBS's Criminal Minds. And with me today is...
Laura Richards, criminal behavioural analyst, former New Scotland Yard and founder of Paladin National Stalking Advocacy Service.
And I'm Lisa Zambetti. I'm the casting director for CBS's Criminal Minds.
And we have an amazingly special guest today.
Hi, I'm Ben Stiller. How you doing?
Hey, excited to have you on Real Crime Profile, Ben.
Yeah, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Can you tell us your role on today's program?
Well, I directed the limited series Escape at Dannemora, and I'm also an executive producer. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, we're really excited to have you here, and I've had a few really interesting interactions with you in the past. I first met you way back when. It was actually in 2004. It was at the Bruce Springsteen Rock the Vote concert, and we were sitting next to each other, actually, and I ended up giving you an FBI hat that night. It was actually the night before I had a bone marrow transplant.
And, oh, my God. That's right. That's right.
And so
I thought you were going to say he pulled us both up on stage and we danced with it.
That's coming next.
Not quite. But my sister snuck me out of Johns Hopkins and drove me down. My brother Tim worked for the FBI also, and he was doing event security, so he got me in. And my brother Peter was backstage with Bruce because he was working for Little Steven. So they got me in, and I was sitting next to you and Ethan Hawke and Andy Garcia. And at some point, we talked, and I gave you my hat. I had to sneak back out and go back up to the hospital because I was not supposed to be out. And then I watched the rest of the concert on TV there. It was really kind of surreal. But then years later, when I met you with Robert De Niro at, I think it was Little Falkers you were shooting.
Right. I remember that. You came to the set, right?
Yes, and you shook my hand, and I was like really impressed at how built you became. Like you were all built up. I guess you had just done Tropic Thunder or something. You were quite massive, and you shook my hand and you said, "Nice to meet you." And I said, "I met you before at the Bruce Springsteen concert." And you said, "You lived?" And that was so funny. And I was like, "Yeah, pretty much."
I'm so happy you lived.
Yeah, there you go.
Somewhere in my wedding album, there's a picture of your sister Amy and Eddie Pepitone doing the conga. So she came all the way from California to our wedding, and it was really fun. Anyway.
Wow.
I've never met you before, Ben, but I'm a big fan of Meet the Parents and a lot of the work that you've done that's kept me laughing for a very long time, and my family too. So I'm really excited.
Thank you. Thanks.
Now we have something that completely different genre. It's really moving. It's amazing. And so we want to talk to you about Escape at Dannemora and your experiences and what went on behind the scenes and what drew you to this project and how you wanted to make it express what happened during this incredibly historic escape from a very high security prison in upstate New York.
I was actually not in the United States when the escape happened. I was working on a movie in Italy. So it kind of like was this very big thing in the news for, when it was happening, I guess. And then it sort of ended. And, but then I got sent the script by Brett and Michael based on what they knew about the story. And it seemed fascinating to me. I think maybe, people might've thought there were a lot of funny elements of it actually in the beginning. Maybe that's why they sent it to me. I don't know why they sent it to me. Because there are, I mean, there are amazing twists and turns in the story, and the actual reality of escaping from that place, how that happens, and the relationships that developed to allow it to happen within the prison, are fascinating. Until we got that Inspector General report, that's when I decided to actually do it.
That was pretty amazing, huh? Very, very detailed report.
Can you talk about casting Patricia for a sec? Because our listeners may not know that you worked with her in a fantastic movie called Flirting with Disaster, a David O. Russell movie, and you guys were great. So talk about how, I mean, she's probably at the top of every casting list that I've ever worked on, but did you reach out to her first? Was she on a list? Can you share that with us a little bit?
Well, there were very few people, I think, for each role that we were thinking about, and Patricia was right at the top. She's just an amazing actress. I think if anything was maybe, holding us back in the beginning of thinking before we went to her was just like, she's so incredibly beautiful, movie star like person, just her look. She's just, and I think the character of Joyce isn't that. That was the only concern, was like, can she disappear into this character? And because I think that was an important part of it, that it wasn't the idea that Joyce was this alluring vixen. She was a 51-year-old grandmother who was just kind of ordinary. And I don't mean that to be judgmental, in terms of her as, what she looked like as a person, but she didn't look like Patricia, who, I felt like that was a concern. So for us with Patricia, I think it was like figuring a way for her to disappear into this character. And she, of course, did that. I didn't think she worried about people having to like her as a character. She trusted that the audience would have some sort of empathy with her if she's a human being who has, justifications for what she does.
Patricia Arquette really does inhabit every part of the character. I mean, she's unrecognizable, and just the voice and her mannerisms and movements. As you said, the psychology is so important around her. 51, craving excitement, and that kind of microcosm. She's a big fish in a small pond, getting all this attention.
On that level, I feel like you can understand why this person would want that attention, would want to get out of the life that she was living. She obviously crossed the line and made a lot of mistakes, but to understand why someone would do something like this, I think was very important. Yeah. And that's what I think Patricia brought to it.
Yeah, well, as you know, Ben, our focus on this podcast is the victim's perspective. And so one of the interesting things that the series brings out is, was Tilly an actual offender, or was she a victim as well? Was she completely manipulated into this? Did they take advantage of her needs and her trapped in a small town, in a small life, and wanting to get out? Did they actually recognize that and manipulate her?
Right. I mean, I think they definitely manipulated her. I think she didn't realize it. I think she went in there thinking that she probably had the upper hand with these guys, and was. I think she's on a certain level, she was a manipulative person when you look at her history. And she wasn't an honest person. We know that, but I think she felt that she could sort of cross the line in that tailor shop to a certain extent, and then she got drawn in, and of course these inmates are going to manipulate her if they can. I mean, that's just the natural order of things, right?
It has to be expected. Exactly right. That's why even her character and kind of addictive personality and craving excitement and need for reassurance, it's for me very strange that she would have that role in a maximum security prison, given her personality type.
Yeah, I mean, I think people probably aren't doing personality profiles on the people that they hire, right? When you do the job application, and it's a tough life up there. You're not making a lot of money. Most of these people are working multiple jobs. She was working at a couple of other places, another prison too. And I think it was interesting to me going up there and visiting the prison and visiting the tailor shop and seeing the dynamic there, even post Tilly. And now, when people who work there or go there, they have to bring these, all of their, the bags that they bring in are all totally clear plastic. They call them tilly totes now.
Yeah.
So that you can see everything
on the
they're
world.
carrying. Yeah. But, you know, it's not like that the women that go in there are, you know, they know what they're walking into this very stressful, dangerous situation every day. The men and the women who work there. And watching that dynamic of what happens in there, it's still the same way, where there's 40 or so inmates in the tailor shop, one civilian supervisor, and one corrections officer in that room. Yeah.
So I was going to say, Matt seems to be much more kind of Machiavellian and psychopathic in the way that he behaves. And I don't know if you...
Well, I mean, that's how we felt that Matt was just from knowing what we knew about his history and his past as a murderer, it seemed like his crimes were much less impulsive, it felt to me, than what David Sweat's crime was, the killing of the policeman. And they're both very different crimes. You know, I think that, you know, it was, to me, what Richard Matt did, the reason why he was in prison, you know, the murder of his boss was just so, I mean, so cold-blooded and so cruel. When you meet David Sweat, he's a very affable guy in person. He says that in prison he had to build up his body, and just out of fear of being attacked all the time by either corrections officers or other inmates. And he claims that he's not really responsible for the death of that police officer. He's with two other guys. But the fact is that, you know, that did happen, and he was shot multiple times, and he ran him over with his car. He talks about it. I mean, he talks about like wanting to show that he was tough, and at that time too, when he was younger, that he was kind of like talked about like killing cops, and he has issues. Both these guys do. So they're and you know, then they did 12 years in prison. He's really proud of the fact he never got into a fight in prison, never got an infraction. David Sweat.
People think that monsters like that are monsters through and through, and that they don't realize that most psychopaths, one of the characteristics of a psychopath is charisma, charm, and the fact that they can talk to you, and they can make you relax and feel at home and feel like they like you and you like them, and they draw people to them because of that charm. And I think that charm is what he used, what both of them used, to get Tilly to sort of lower her defenses and to manipulate her to do exactly what they wanted, not necessarily what she wanted. And then, of course, you know, when Matt was saying, yeah, we'll get her to drive us to, you know, West Virginia, and then we'll dump her, right? Of course, you know, we'll just get rid of her. Meanwhile, you know, she believed that she was going to live happily ever after with Sweat, at least.
Yeah, and it's really unclear because Richard Matt, you know, didn't live to tell his side of the story, so we don't really know exactly who was responsible for what. But I think they both, you know, saw that they could manipulate her for sure. And I really feel that it was because they saw that she had a soft spot for David Sweat.
They used that against her.
And I think Richard Matt was very good at just manipulating people and being able to exist inside of in that prison ecosystem.
This episode is brought to you by Showtime and the new limited event series Escape at Dannemora, directed by Ben Stiller and starring Benicio del Toro, Patricia Arquette, and Paul Dano. Based on bizarre but true events, Escape at Dannemora tells the story of two prisoners who broke out of a maximum security prison in upstate New York, and their twisted relationship with the female prison employee who aided in their escape. Thrilling, emotional, dark, and unbelievable. In the town of Dannemora, it's not just the prisoners who are looking for a way out. Watch Escape at Dannemora, now streaming, only on Showtime.
Working or being in a prison is a really intense thing.
You just don't want to be in jail. It goes to this other level.
It's an adrenaline drip, constantly dripping, and you know, you got to find who's going to help you survive. And then just being there, you're going to dream about getting out.
So as part of the research, we thought, well, let's call up the Inspector General who wrote the report and see if they'll meet with us. And and meeting with her, she was just such an interesting person.
He is amazing.
We talked to her. Yeah.
Oh, you did? Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, she's great. And her favorite line in the show was at the end when Tilly says, "Does that sound apologetic? Because my lawyer says I have to sound apologetic." She said, "That's Tilly in a nutshell."
Yeah.
Because I think I think Catherine really believes that Tilly was as manipulative as they were in her own way,
Right.
and was no victim really.
I think that you definitely show that when we go back in time and we see her manipulating the men in her life.
Well,
no, I just said one man in particular. I mean, Lyle, she manipulated the hell out of him, and he's another character that I see as a victim in this.
Well, I think he is probably the one with the most sort of the strongest sort of moral center in the whole show, because he really, to this day stands by Tilly and is waiting for her to come home.
Yeah, his character is certainly honest and loyal, and even when he sees evidence to the contrary, he'll choose the best view of somebody that he loves.
Yeah. And that scene between him and Richard Matt when he goes and confronts him in the tailor shop in episode 3 is he actually did have an interaction with him and talked to him about that. A version of that scene happened in real life. Just even the fact that that a civilian worker could go into the tailor shop and say, "Hey, I want to talk to that inmate about something," and have a conversation about, and they're having a conversation about a painting that he gave to his wife. I mean, just that whole sort of reality to me was fascinating.
So what did you learn, Ben, that sort of surprised you the most throughout this whole process?
I mean, I think the biggest thing that I took away from it was the reality of the prison system in our country and how flawed it is. And when you go to a place like Clinton, it's just such a daunting and really, dark, depressing place. No prison is going to be a happy place, but it's not a place when you go in there where you feel like people are going to be rehabilitated. And I think part of that is also just, it's just so outdated and it's been there for so long. And you walk in there and it could be 80 years ago, it could be 50 years ago, it could be 20 years ago. It's just this place that's sort of stuck in time and it's out of time. I think the relationships that develop between the corrections officers and the inmates are, they're just rooted in this sort of just the way it's always been there and the status quo, and the corrections officers and their fathers and grandfathers have worked there for generations. And it's that's where the complacency came out of. And I get why they want to get out of here. I get why the civilian worker wants to get out of here. Nobody wants to be in this place.
I noticed in the finale, some of the shots that you have of Clinton, it reminded me of The Shining. It was very ominous as you slow pan past the facility. And so I think that you definitely captured that.
I mean, the facility actually becomes a character in this series. And I think particularly because you have the yard, and you have the tunnels underneath and you have where the guys are living. So there's so many different levels and facets to it that it really becomes a character. And it is, as Lisa said, ominous.
Yeah. Well, the North Yard is just a fascinating place. It's been there as long as the prison's been there. The prison's existed in some form or another for, I think, over 130, 140 years there. I mean, the history of it is just amazing. But that yard started out as a baseball field, and they used to have baseball games between the inmates and civilian teams that would come in. And I think like 70 or 80 years ago, there was a riot, or they took a team hostage or something.
Oh my goodness.
That stuff.
But it's just its own world, that place. To be able to film there was really important. We didn't think we were going to even have access to the prison until about 6 weeks before shooting.
Right.
So
how much did you shoot in there? It was quite.
We only shot inside and on the North Yard. So we shot the scenes in episode 4 and episode 1 on the North Yard. One was in the winter, one was in the summer, and then we shot all of the scenes of them going in and out of the prison, going to work and around the town. We shot there for real too. So we'd be shooting at the pedestrian gate of the prison, during the day when people were going to work, and so when it was shift change, we'd have to stop and let everybody go in and out. We were taking up their parking. People were very gracious. We were really we became a nuisance after a while. But it was so important to be able to have the real place. And then we had the real manhole, and they unsealed the manhole for us, which was really, really great too.
Incredible. I mean, the cinematography and the music are just phenomenal.
Yeah, the music. Wow. That's something that it set the tone. A lot of the songs, I mean, obviously some of the songs were old songs, some of the songs were new songs. It was such a great blend. But one of the things I really loved about it is that you had a real reason to be hearing the song in the actual film. And so in the scenes, there was a reason for, the car radio was on or somebody's headphones or whatever. Who picked all that music? Is that all you?
Yeah, I mean, basically, to me, there was a vibe that kind of came out of this tone. So ultimately, those choices are pretty subjective when you're directing something. You go, oh, I like that song. It feels right, or it has a vibe. But all the songs that play in the tailor shop were chosen because we knew that Tilly listened to the top 40 radio station and played it in the tailor shop. So we just got the playlist from January to June of 2015 of the top 40 station up in Plattsburgh that she listened to. And that became our playlist to choose songs from. So it's like, oh, Meghan Trainor, that was, or Uptown Funk or whatever it was, that was actually playing in the tailor shop. So that was fun and then it started to feel like, okay, this sort of feels like a thematic sort of thing. That, it's interesting to hear those sort of upbeat pop songs with these guys working at the sewing machines. It just was something strange about the setup in there of these, murderers and rapists and really just violent criminals working at sewing machines in a room with sort of an overseer type person at a desk with this pop music playing. It just was a strange reality.
I agree.
I want to give a shout out to your DP, Jessica Lee Gagne. I mean, amazing. And Jim and I were trying to was there a lot of drones used in the overhead, or were the real aerial? I mean, your aerial unit, was that practical? I mean, what was that?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I have feelings about that just because I think drones have changed the way that people film now, because it used to be if you wanted to get an aerial shot, you needed to have a helicopter. And drones are much more inexpensive or less expensive. So we were able to afford, I feel personally, like I'm old school, like I like the helicopter shots, because on a helicopter, you can put a much bigger lens on the camera. They still haven't developed technology to have long lenses on the drone, so you can't have these sort of stacked up telephoto shots that you can do on a helicopter. So we were able to afford 1 day of helicopter work, which we used for, say, the opening shot in the first episode when it kind of comes up over the trees.
Yeah, which is amazing.
Clinton. That's something you couldn't do with a drone because you couldn't get a lens like that on a drone. But then a lot of the other stuff, especially the winter stuff, was shot by Katie Pruitt, who has worked with me as an assistant director for years, and she's now started to do drone work. She got her own drone, and she just got up there, like when there was like a snowstorm, she would go up to Plattsburgh with her husband and they'd get the shots. Yeah, so we got these amazing shots when the snow hit. And those are actual prisoners on the North Yard and those overhead shots, and it's all it's all real. But but I personally always gravitate back towards the helicopter stuff.
Right, and you do open the finale with just mountains as far as the eye can see, and you get a sense that somewhere in there are these two offenders. And where are they? And it's incredible to set the context of what they were up against to try to get to Canada.
And then drill down to them.
And then what the law enforcement was up against to try to find them.
Right. That actually is a drone shot. Because but that's what you could only do with a drone, because the camera had to drop down into the trees and then go in and find
it. It was one continuous shot. Yeah.
This must have been grueling for the actors, for your camera. I mean, it looked handheld through most of it. You tell us about that.
It was challenging. It was, we actually had to start the whole shoot of the entire show with that, because we started shooting in August and we finished in March. So we had to shoot the last episode first, because we were fighting just the leaves changing. That was challenging. We went to a place called Natural Bridge and Cave, this amazing spot that's a couple hours south of Plattsburgh, to find that area. And everybody had to hike up and take ATVs. And it was a little crazy, but it was important for me, it was important to try to get the feeling of this sort of, the opposite of what they've been in for most of the show, right? It's like all of a sudden the world opens up, and in that time, Richard Matt's world kind of turns upside down because he's so good at being in prison, but when he gets out into the world, he can't really survive.
You had Sweat.
It was real.
He's the opposite, right? He's thriving. He thrived.
I think so. Yeah, Sweat was just naturally felt more at home. He knew how to take care of himself in the woods. He knew how to survive, and I think he just had more of a desire, I think, to actually to escape. I just don't know how Matt felt. He wasn't as healthy, and he couldn't get around. And he got sick. He ended up getting sick out there. And that's how they that's how they found him, is because they found his DNA in one of the cabins, because he was having the runs. So
that scene is turned my stomach. I gotta say, I was like heaving whilst watching it.
So it's interesting how you turned them into kind of a Felix and Oscar odd couple at one point. But I'm wondering, the only two people who knows what happened to them during those 21 days are them, and one of them is dead. Spoiler alert. And so all those things that happened, did you get that from Sweat? Is this just what you imagined, all those little cabins and all those?
No. We got a lot of real information from Sweat, and also the guy who finds them at the cabin when they have to leave, John Stockwell. That's the real guy who showed up at the cabin.
Oh, really?
That's great.
I love that.
And we couldn't shoot at his actual cabin because it was too remote, but we actually built that cabin in near a quarry up in upstate New York, but it was a reproduction of his actual cabin, and so he told us exactly what happened, what he found there, and David Sweat gave us a lot of details about what they did on the run for 3 weeks. I mean, all those things, like their birthdays happening, and Matt not knowing it was his birthday, and all that was all real. After I met with Sweat, he wrote me an 8-page letter and offering more details of what happened. In that little moment where Matt says, "Hey, David, strawberries," where he's smelling the strawberries, eating the strawberry. That's based on Sweat wrote me in the letter. He said, "This is what happened when we split up." He called out, "Hey, David, strawberries," and then they came across these two New York State troopers or whoever they were, and he wanted to go after them, and that's when they split up. So a lot of that stuff is really almost word for word for what he told us. And like I said, I'm not sure if he was always telling us the truth, but they were interesting details that I think good to put in.
So thank you to everybody who welcomed us here today, and I just want to say you guys did an incredible job, so thank you very much.
The fact that it's true, it's really a sensational story.
And I think that's what makes this show unique.
Yeah, one of the things that struck us, and that, Laura and I certainly have worked in law enforcement for decades, and the authenticity that you brought to it. I don't know how you felt, Laura, when you've gone into correctional facilities, but every time I did as an FBI agent or as a prosecutor, I felt vulnerable. I felt like everybody there hated me, didn't want me there, or wanted me there to kill me. And I just never felt safe inside one of those institutions. And I think you brought that out, and particularly the scene with the steam pipe when he was struggling to get through that. I mean, I literally was getting claustrophobic. I mean, I was having trouble breathing. It was so authentic.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, that's what I felt. Like I said, when I went in there, I felt it was very oppressive, and I think that was so important for my experience of being able to tell the story. It was that the experience going in there, visiting what was the honor block, visiting their actual cells, seeing the catwalk that they cut their way through to, seeing the welded shut patches where they were still there, the patches where they cut through. You could see like the new metal there. But yes, I felt it. I felt scared when I went in there. At one point we went into the cell block and they were timing it out. First of all, they gave us a whole speech about basically saying like, we're in here, you're vulnerable in here. Hopefully this is going to go okay. When they gave us a tour of the tailor shop, when we got through the tailor shop, I looked at the superintendent, and he literally did like a phew. All right, we did that. Like it was okay, because it's you don't know what could happen. And I felt that energy going to the cell block when they had to lock us in the office area where the corrections officers were, like kind of that bird cage area, while they went out for lunch or whatever. And it was really like, wow, we're just like vulnerable here. And some of them were like shouting out like, hey, some of them were just giving me dirty looks. One guy said like, fucker, And then one guy said to me as I was walking through, he just looked at me from his cell and he said, tell the truth.
Wow.
Nice.
I was like, all right, what does that mean? I don't know what that means, but he was basically saying there's a lot going on here. And you feel it. And you feel it on both sides. And I felt that just as much from the corrections officers.
And Catherine Leahy Scott, I mean, a very impressive woman, but, her being a female going into a maximum security facility, trying to get to the truth, that's...
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, I think it was very, tough for her and her team, because let's face it, nobody there was proud of the escape happening and nobody wants to be called out on it. And they were there to find out what happened, what went wrong. I know that they were facing a lot of people who, on the correction side, who were not wanting to be that helpful because what is it going to bring them?
Right. And that's one of the things we talked to her about is the fact that, some people were complaining that it took a year for her to do this report. Well, based on not only the comprehensive nature of that report, but that situation. The bad guys who did the bad things didn't want to get in trouble, and the good guys who did bad things didn't want to get in trouble. So the real truth had to be mined out of it. And I think they did an amazing job getting to it.
Yeah, and they did, I think. And, any of the corrections officers I talked to up there would say to me, just make sure you tell the story fully. And, it's just a few bad apples don't represent everybody up here.
I thought it was great that you had at least that one character who came in and he was by the book and he wasn't trying to hurt anybody. He wasn't trying to do anybody wrong. He was just doing his job.
That was important to us. That was, I wanted to have at least one corrections officer who's just doing his job, maybe one corrections officer who's a bit more of an asshole because they exist.
But I love that whole scene with Gene Palmer and Catherine Leahy Scott. Did you give Matt the meat, and the meat with the Matt keeps going back and forth. And then
and he says we were in a gray area with the meat.
Yeah.
And then she challenges him on the sexism that, I would imagine is rife there too.
Yeah. And that's basically word for word from the transcript of, of the interaction that happened. So
you can really get her personality out of it. And when we talked to her, we were really amazed. She's so together and she knows what's right and she knows what she had to do and unapologetic. She just doing her job because her job is to make sure the good people are good. And that's really important because there's a lot of situations in which people can go off reservation and that isn't good for anybody.
Yeah, and on a state level, it's it's sort of like the gamut of infractions from very small, sort of trivial things to prison escape, and sometimes a small trivial thing she was saying can lead to it's like it's a guy who's like some sort of state worker who has caught with like porn on his computer that he shouldn't have, but he happens to work for somebody in an office that is connected to the governor's office, and so it could be there's stages of these things that can lead to bigger problems that it's just an interesting world that she's in.
So speaking of the governor's office, we understand that actually you and your interaction with the governor as well as with the people of Dannemora, actually that's the reason why you got such amazing access so you could shoot this incredible, iconic piece of work in such reality.
Yeah, I have to say, it was about 6 weeks before shooting and we didn't have a location. Literally. I mean, and if as you know, in making shows or movies, 6 weeks out is very close to actual production time.
Yeah.
And we had a prison in Pittsburgh that we found that was really good, that we used for a lot of the exteriors that were within the walls of the prison. Mm-hmm. So then walking to and from tailor shop or, to the cell block. But we didn't have the actual access to the actual prison and we didn't have it's impossible to recreate that. You can't recreate that North Yard we were starting to figure out ways to do like a green screen North Yard where we'd build it in a parking lot and, then cobble it together with visual effects. But that would have been way too expensive and just really not for the aesthetic of what we wanted to do, which was have it be very real and have just like a palpable feel to it. So basically, we were 6 weeks out, we're in trouble, and I said, I'm going to just try to get in touch with the governor, right? Because the New York State Department of Corrections, understandably, wasn't really being that cooperative. They didn't want to help us out. But I felt like this is forcing us out of the state anyway, even if we couldn't even find a location, but definitely wasn't going to be in New York State. Right. And I thought there was at least an appeal to the governor to say, like, hey, we want to bring these dollars into the state. This is a New York story.
That's a good route with Cuomo. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was a real thing. So I had done something for Mayor de Blasio, a video, and the guy that did that video, I got in touch with him. I said, do you know anybody in the governor's office? And he hooked me up with his chief of staff at her email, and I sent her an email, and it took about a week and a half, but she emailed me back, and then all of a sudden we were on the phone with Department of Corrections, and they were listening to us, and said, these are our requests. And we went through what we wanted was access to the manhole, access to maybe getting a tour of the prison. We didn't think we'd even get inside the prison. We just wanted to actually at that point be able to shoot outside the prison, so we could shoot the walls of the prison and have them, go in and out, or at least be near it. So they wouldn't, because we filmed up there without their permission, they could make our life really difficult. Right. If we wanted to do a drone shot and there's a drone, they were like, could shoot it down or whatever. Yeah. So they gave us permission to shoot outside, and the manhole. They said they'd open up the manhole for us, and that was it. And then I got a call that the governor would meet with me if I wanted to meet with him, and he was great. And he basically, we sat down and we sat down for about an hour, and he said, what are you doing? Like, this story is crazy. It's like, he was kind of a fan of the story,
Yeah.
Then you gave him a part in the show, and he has the best entrance of anybody.
Yeah, right.
He comes out of the freaking sky. I love it. Imperioli is just keeps it alive. Yeah. I loved how he just swaggered his way. Oh my gosh.
I used to work for his dad, Mario, when he was lieutenant governor and in New York, and what an amazing guy. He was definitely a mentor to me, and I know how much he really cared about his sons, and he wanted his son to be able to, ascend to maybe a level higher than he did.
I was very appreciative, and it was a real human element there, and so I sat down across from him and basically told him what we were doing, and at that point we didn't have access to inside the prison at all. I was hoping we'd get a tour, and then he said, so what do you need? And there was this moment where I was just sitting there, and I was like,
really?
Can we shoot inside the prison?
You went for it.
And he kind of looked at his chief of staff, and then looked back at me. He's like, you got to shoot inside the prison.
Ah!
I was like, oh my God.
I know you were like, you wanted to jump up and down at that point, right?
It was crazy. Yeah, it was crazy because I knew there were like 200 people back at the office waiting to hear what happened in this meeting, and then that just changed everything for us. And then because the most important thing was then we got to go in and talk to the people who work there, and then we were able to get Jim Facto, who became our technical advisor, who was a captain there for 30 years, and we're on set every day, and were telling us the real deal. This Chris Milady, who was a corrections officer in the tailor shop when Matt and Sweat were there. So they were overseeing every scene we shot and giving us the guidance, and in a real way. Because like in the scene where in episode 4, when Murder gets taken out and gets beaten up, it gets pulled out kind of due to some, Matt behind the scenes work. They were there. I was nervous that day. I said, I didn't even know if we should have them there that day because I didn't know how they would react to us doing this scene, because it was based on Eric Jensen, who was our inmate tech advisor, saying this is what happens in this place. But Chris Milady, to his credit, said, okay, if this is going to happen, this is the way it would happen. And they were very honest. And I think that made a huge difference because, we felt like, okay, we're telling the story in a real way, and we're not trying to whitewash anything, and we're trying to tell it in a balanced way, but like to have that input made all the difference.
If you could talk about the actual shooting of Sweat, that scene, and talk about the actual person who did that.
Yeah. So that was the actual place that happened.
Whoa. Oh my God.
And it was the actual Bortak team that took out Richard Matt play themselves also, and that's all in the actual spot where it happened, and that's the actual trailer that he spent his last night in. Pretty much everything about the last 24 hours is the way it happened with him.
Wow.
And with David Sweat, that's the actual spot that he was shot, and Jay Cook, who was the state trooper that shot him, is not playing himself because he didn't want to play himself because I think he was shy, and he's a very humble guy. He didn't do any interviews when he caught David Sweat. Everybody wanted to interview him for a week afterwards, and he wouldn't talk to anybody because he just felt he was doing his job. And he happens to be one of the best shots in the New York State Police. I mean, he literally he's a shooting instructor, and so.
I was going to say, because that was a tough shot, as he's running at
230 feet away. He shot him twice, and he hit him twice. It was great. One afternoon, a couple of weeks before we shot, he took me in his patrol car, and he took me basically on the route that he was driving that afternoon. He went out by himself. He said he had like someone who worked for him in his office. One of the women who worked for me, he said, "Hey, you want to come out with me? Let's go catch this guy," as a joke. And she said, "No, I'm staying in the office." And he went, driving around, and he decided to take a right where he would have usually taken a left going down that road in Constable, New York. And he said he just saw this. He saw about 200 yards ahead of him when he was driving. He saw a guy crossing the road. And so he sped up his car. He said he'd just driven by like some graduation party that was happening on the side of the road, and it was quiet. He sped up his car. He saw this guy stop, and that, as it plays out in the show, is exactly as it happened. Exactly what he said to him. He said that Sweat turned around, pointed to his face because Sweat had a mustache. And one of the things that they were doing when they were on the run was Sweat was making sure that he was clean shaven but kept a mustache because he thought that it wouldn't look like he was a fugitive if he had a mustache. Somehow that would make it seem like he wasn't like a guy with a beard and looking scruffy.
Right.
And it's interesting because David Sweat told me his version of what happened, and Jay Cook told me his version of what happened, but they both have never talked about it or met. So it was interesting to hear both their points of view. And he's pointed to his mustache like, "Hey, I'm not the guy you're looking for. I have a mustache." And that moment, Jay Cook was like, "Oh, that's the guy for sure." And then he started to run. And then Jay ran across, ran down this alfalfa field. He was running towards this wood line. They were about half a mile from the Canadian border. And he had to run after him for about, he said, like, I guess it was like 100 yards or maybe less, that he was running after him. And then finally he just kept yelling at him, "Stop, or I'm going to shoot you. I'm telling you, I'm going to shoot you." He said it got comical. He literally just kept saying, "I'm going to shoot you. I'm telling you, I'm going to shoot you." And then he threw down his backpack, Sweat did, and which let him go a little faster. And then Jay just said he stopped. And he said, I don't know, if you've been in this situation with shooting somebody, but he said that all sound and everything, he called it something like
auditory shutdown.
Auditory exclusion or something, right?
Yeah.
No, he didn't hear anything, and all he did was, did what his training told him, which was he looked, through the sights of his gun. And I tried to get that shot in there where, like, you sort of see him become this sort of like out of focus blip, and he just, focused on the far sight. And he shot him once. He said he didn't even hear the sound of the shot go off. He didn't even know if he hit him or not. And then he shot him a second time, and then he saw that he went down, and that was it. So it was pretty amazing that I just happened upon him. Yeah. The fact that Sweat decided to even cross the road in the middle of the day, to me, told me that he was getting a little bit tired and kind of, careless, because he was very smart. He was only traveling at night. And he was, he decided to do this sort of reckless thing crossing the road.
Tired and kind of delirious. He can see his goal. That's how it kind of came across. That he's just.
Yes, that was the feeling. That he was so close, But that's how
you telling that story, Ben. I've watched it, but I'm sitting here with my mouth open, just hanging off every word.
Yeah, I have a video on my iPhone. I videoed Jay Cook telling me the whole thing. And. It's one of those things, but like half the time I had the iPhone like upside down. When it's like sideways, like. But like I'll watch the video like this and like turn the camera around. Like I watch it over and over again. It's the first time that he ever told anybody what happened, because he never did an interview.
Wow.
So I felt very fortunate that he opened up to us about it, and that kind of information to me is just fascinating, and was really important to us.
Really special.
And it's special to hear it as well. So thank you for sharing that. And how big is the crew? How big was your?
The crew was it would expand or contract depending, but basically we were, it was a pretty big crew. It was probably 80 people most of the time. For the flashback, for Tilly's flashback, we stopped in episode 6. We stopped shooting and did that last June. Gave Patricia a chance to lose some weight, and we did it with a stripped down crew where Jessica, our cinematographer, operated, and we had, I think it was maybe a crew of 25 people, because we wanted to shoot that very sort of documentary and simple. But most of the time we had a lot of people, and yeah, shooting that manhunt stuff. We had an amazing second unit director named Phil Nielsen, who I've worked with for about 11 years now, and he's just incredible. So we have a good connection with each other, and he got some amazing stuff.
Well, that's awesome. And obviously we all enjoyed this series. The scenes where you depicted what these guys did to get into prison were very disturbing. And of course, being a victim-focused podcast, we'd like to honor those victims. And so we'll put up pictures of the officer and Matt's boss. And I would like to know, so your sort of parting thoughts about the victims of these crimes.
Yeah, I mean, it was important to me when we were trying to figure out how to tell that part of the story, to figure out a way to humanize them. But it was challenging because it's such a short amount of time that you have to do that.
Right.
And so when we came upon the idea of telling the first part, the killing of Kevin Tarsia, through his point of view, that was for us something we thought was an effective way to actually see this victim as a person.
Yeah.
And that's the reality. And I think we get caught up, I know I do, when you watch the prison escape story, they become the protagonists, the people escaping. But the reality was these guys, were murderers, and they did horrible things to real people. So for us, trying to figure out a way to portray that was effective and would hopefully really give you a different point of view of who these people were. Because I do think that's the hardest thing, is to understand when you do a prison story of what the actual crime is that these people have committed and how they've affected people's lives. So I hope that we were able to do that. Though I'd imagine it's very hard for victims' families probably to see that. And I hope that, we're in telling the story, we're able to portray the reality of who these people were.
Yeah, well, we really appreciate you doing that, because the fact that you make them real humans and the middle of their lives, whether it's Christmas time and you think everything's going to be nice, or whether you're just out doing your job and all of a sudden, in the blink of an eye, your life is taken in an extremely violent way.
There was a time when we were in the making of the show when there was budgetary questions, where there was question of whether or not to have episode 6. Because in terms of this, and for us, it was never a question, that then it would be missing the point.
Right. Well, we appreciate that.
And I just want to give a shout out to Jim Parrick, who played Officer Tarsia. He did a fantastic job.
Yeah, I thought he was wonderful. Yeah.
And poor Richie Allen, who played William Rickardson, who had to spend a lot of time in a trunk.
Yeah, Richie was really incredible. And, it was important. It was interesting. Richie, he felt it was very important to give a voice to that character and because he's a victim, but it was very important for him to show that this guy was not just taking what was happening to him. And I thought, he was fighting back in his own way.
This entire series was so, as I said, rich and engaging. So you did an amazing job as a director and as an executive producer. And we really appreciate you allowing us to share it with you, because really we were so excited when we found out that you guys wanted to have us help you get the word out about this amazing series. It's really, really good.
Yeah.
Thanks, man.
And forensically deconstructed as well in a slightly different way, from the law enforcement perspective and the psychology and the relationships, which I know you're very into as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, I've been enjoying listening to you guys talk about it and talk about these other, the other crimes you guys talk about. To be able to go in depth with it, to me, is really wonderful, because we spent so much time with it.
But listen, Ben, thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate it. And, do you have any parting thoughts, anything that you'd like to talk about before we wrap up here?
No, I mean, I think it's interesting to be at this part of the process after having been with this project for a couple of years, and it's nice to be able to put it out into the world finally, and have people like yourselves interact with it, because I feel like that's what I wanted to be, is an interactive feeling with the audience where you're learning something about a world you haven't been in, and hopefully feeling something, and maybe that's what you hope for when you make something like this. So thank you.
Well, that's awesome.
All right.
Thank you so much. All right,
All
well,
right.
take care, man. Yeah, thank you for listening to Real Crime Profile.
If you like our podcasts, there are a few things you can do. You can take 2 minutes and go to Apple Podcasts and leave a 5-star review. You can also check out all Real Crime Profile offers and promotions and our sponsors in our show notes. Another thing you can do is go to Facebook and like our Facebook page, and you can also follow us on Twitter at Real Crime Profile without the E. And one last thing, please tell your friends, family and colleagues about us and spread the Real Crime Profile word. Thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate all of our listeners.
Real Crime Profile is produced and edited by Paul Francis Sullivan. Sound engineering by Mike Thal. Music is composed by Simba Tsumba. Logo art by Jim Clementi. Real Crime Profile is produced by XG Productions and distributed by Wondery.
For advice and support if you're experiencing stalking in the UK, you can contact Paladin National Stalking Advocacy Service on 0203 866 4107, or you can go to the website where there's a lot of information and advice that you can follow on www.paladinservice.co.uk. If you're experiencing domestic abuse, you can call the National Domestic Violence Helpline for free on 0800 2000 247. In the US, if you're experiencing domestic abuse and need advice, shelter or counselling, you can call Genesis, the 24-hour hotline, on 214-946-4357. You can also go to their website for further advice or support, www.genesisshelter.org. And there's the domestic violence hotline on 800 799 7233.